better education, even though the building may be slightly larger to be more cost-effective and efficient. At the middle grades, we're taking 6th grade out, distributing it to the 7th and 8th grade, but still giving 6th graders that special attention that they need. I'm going to go into more detail about that. But what we're doing is spreading out a better mix of learning, maximizing the opportunities to be small scale in their delivery of education, but more effective and efficient by better size. And then we have the high school situation, 9, 10, 11th, and 12th. I've mentioned to you before that we've worked across the United States and Canada, and tonight it's a real pleasure to talk about many of those very specific facilities from an educational point of view. I'm going to be talking education with that hat on, and Sam Johnson, a well-respected architect, is going to put real faces, if you will, through buildings to what I'll be talking about educationally. But I had this list up, and yes, we did plan the Disney Celebration School. I'll show some examples of that. The Enloe Magnet High School of America, with a great business partner in the Wake County Medical Center. We've done corporate learning centers, and I think there's an opportunity for the school district there. The Brookfield Zoo, I'll bring examples of distance learning to the Moat Museum. Scarsdale, Illinois, or Hinsdale, I'll show examples there, and also the fact that we've planned some of the top high schools in the United States. So let's look at the elementary grades for a minute. You'll recall that elementary is where it's all starting. Much more complex. We're talking about multimedia and video in the elementary grades. Robotics and Lego Logo robotics. Using microscopes, even for the most young of our children in preschool and kindergarten grades, laptop computers in the early elementary grades, and integrating art into the elementary program. But with those goals, what's still happening? Some years ago, I found that our schools weren't designed well for visual and auditory learners, how we see and how we learn from hearing. So when I did a study with very young children, I found that some students would look at a rectangle, but because of the angle, see a square. Or they might look at an oval and see a circle, or reversely, look at a rectangle and, or a square and see a rectangle. The reason for this, we see it every Saturday afternoon on a football match. When you look on the field, you see the band make a formation and it looks in perspective, but if you were to look down from the top, they've actually distorted the picture so that it looks right from the audience. But unfortunately, the reverse of that is true in many of our schools. So one of the most effective and efficient future trends for design is to plan for visual and auditory learning, kinesthetics, and the ways by which students are learning today. Yet, we have much of our new emerging technology that causes screen glare and other kinds of things that distract from that opportunity to learn. So what happens is, and in some of the classrooms here in St. Joseph, we have public address system approach to sound, when in actuality our groups are smaller, individualized, and using multimedia all at the same time. So one of the first levels of learning, doing the fundamentals, is creating a connection between our use of auditory enhancement, visual orientation, dividing the room up into different types of spaces more effectively, and this substantially enhances the learning process. But what can we do for even the younger of our students? In planning the Brookfield Zoo, we looked at the ways by which we could use different elevations in the classroom, similar to that of a playground, to create a more exciting and effective learning environment. Now let me remind you, when I look out at the audience, my goal tonight, and I was told to do this, really push the envelope, really test what's going on out there. So some of you might say, boy, I wouldn't want anybody to do that. But the point is, I'm trying to show ideas to think about so that we can see if they're right for the St. Joseph School District. So in this model of creating a multi-story preschool or early elementary classroom isn't the answer, it's just a choice that we have a chance to make. But what can you do with that model? You can start looking differently at how students look indoors and outdoors. In this example, the children were able to look out into a tree, see a robin make a nest, see how that tree grows. It may sound silly, but when you're only 4 or 5 years old, that's an incredible experience. So the ways by which we can engage the indoors and outdoors can be much more effectively designed into our buildings. Light shelves. Many of our new office buildings have light shelves. That's where the light comes in, and instead of creating a big bright window and glare on our computers, we bounce it off a shelf up onto the ceiling. It's more energy efficient, and it brings natural light deeper into our classroom, which is good for learning. It's also a very effective tool to help educate students. We can use these design features to help students understand about green design, global warming, and other issues that they're learning about in their curriculum. If we take it a few steps further, we can start creating natural ventilation, natural flows of air through different ceiling heights. Students can study these features in the very early grades and can do so using the technologies you already have in your classrooms. So we can look at and remodel our buildings to become a learning tool and very much a helper to the educational process. What about sensory learning? We talked about the fact you're using clay and other sensory techniques in your science program, but how can we look at sensory learning in terms of a greenhouse or different types of plant life for the younger children? Or how can we use water tables? This one happens to be at the Touch Museum in Philadelphia, but I'm using it effectively on a project I happen to be doing overseas on creative learning and sensory education. Are there ways to bring better sensory learning as a very natural way to enhance the educational process? What about sensory learning in swimming pool design? We can have a swimming pool, but this sensory swimming pool is incredible. The students using it feel the movement of water, different water temperatures, different textures on the floor. They can walk, if you look in the back, under an umbrella of water and hear the sound around them. I'll tell you, every kid goes to that swimming pool complex, but everybody under probably 7th grade is in that pool because it's so much fun. But it's very much an educational process as well. What about science? One of the key issues raised even this morning while working with your staff at the elementary grades is what do we want to do to enhance science in the elementary schools? And there are several techniques we're looking at. But couldn't we benefit from having some labs at the earlier grades that are exciting to be in? This one is for elementary students using microscopes. It's a fun place to be. Whether it's a complete separate lab or maybe included in the general classroom situation, we can enhance the ways by which our younger students are learning science. Techniques in changing the shapes of the room. Some of your older buildings can be remodeled very well, and the shapes of the rooms can be slightly reconfigured to provide better learning spaces and possibly spaces for the science program I just mentioned. So when we look at the older buildings, we can often do very effective remodels that actually enhance the educational process. And I love it when technology works. Isn't that pause just too long? Anybody want to help me out? Okay, I'll go like this. No, I'll go. So classroom shapes are changing, and when they do, they can be very effective to the learning process. Let's spend a minute at the middle school. Now I'm really afraid to scratch my ear. I think he's going to move ahead 2 slides, but so that's a warning. We talked about middle school and how we can bring 6th grade up to the middle school. But we want to be not only effective and efficient in the sizing of that building, but we want to make sure those 6th graders are handled properly. And we can break 6th grade off, if you will, into a learning model that's more appropriate for them than for the 7th and 8th grade. What do I mean by that? Well, we've talked about clustering classrooms for 7th and 8th, maybe 4 classrooms together, but a pair of classrooms really work well for 6th grade. So we can put an English social studies classroom with a math science classroom. Enhance those 2 spaces as a learning team and provide a